afternoon, everyone. Sorry. On behalf of THAC, I would like to warmly welcome you all to the THAC webinar on the topic of how to start a career in international arbitration. Before the webinar starts, I would like to invite Dr. Pratik Akawawatanakorn, Managing Director of Thailand Arbitration Center, for give us his welcome speech. Please welcome.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of THAC, Thailand Arbitration Center, I would like to warmly welcome you all to the first YTHAC webinar. I would like to take this opportunity to wishing you and your families all the best for your health and safety in these difficult times. Nowadays, it is widely known that arbitration and ADRs are growing in importance and gain significant popularity because it offers parties more confidentiality, expertise, less expense, and less formality. On top of it all, it saves time. And we all know that to serve the parties' best interests, arbitrators need to develop their skill and their knowledge. Thailand Arbitration Center is a center providing a full range of alternative dispute resolution services located in the heart of Bangkok. With the view to develop arbitration and ADR community in Thailand and its region, THAC realized the power of young generation and ready to promote the development of the young by establishing YTHAC or Young Thailand Arbitration Center. YTHAC is a group to empower young practitioners, members of the community under the age of 45 who interest in the field of arbitration and alternative dispute resolution. YTHAC will provide a forum to exchange ideas and experiences in practicing and researching arbitration and ADR, and to benefit from the experience for more senior practitioners, broaden members' network within the ADR community in Thailand and beyond, including to increase awareness about ADR, the use of arbitration and ADR, and to educate the legal communities, corporations, and the public on the advantages of arbitration and ADR, as well as domestic and international development and topical issues in arbitration. We believe that YTHAC will be the main driving of the next generation who will drive and developing alternative dispute resolution in the future. This webinar is the inaugural event giving opportunity for the young and the senior to share their perspective and experience. Also, this webinar is another testament to the commitment to Thailand to position itself as a serious player, and there are credible institutions in the domain of international arbitration in Thailand. I look forward to the success to come. Thank you once again. Thank you, Kun Vanina Sucharit Kun Pisut Atakamon, Co-President of YTHAC and other YTHAC committee for their support and tireless work in pushing through this webinar and their strong determination in promoting this initiative. Also, I would like to thank all the speakers and participants who are joining this webinar. I hope this webinar will be very productive for all the participants. I wish you all a fruitful webinar and a very enjoyable. Last but not least, I would like to invite you to be a part of our YTHAC member. We provide a variety of opportunities through events and networking, as well as the benefit of the THAC's activity. You can scan QR code or visit our website www.thhac.or.th/YTHAC or go to this link below to this link below the screen to see more information Thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akawara for giving the welcome. Next, please welcome Mr. Co-president of Young THAC, to give our opening. Please welcome.
Thank you, Kap. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for attending our webinar today. I've seen greetings from people from almost all around the world today. This is very cheerful for Young THAC and for our speakers. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the inaugural event of the Young Thailand Arbitration Center, or so-called YTHAC. First of all, on behalf of YTHAC, I would like to express my gratitude for the following supporting organizations. We have support from Asian International Arbitration Center's Young Practitioners Group, from Asian Law Student Association, from Arbitral Women and Young Arbitral Women Practitioners, from Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, from HK45 of Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, and from Young Singapore International Arbitration Center. As co-president of YTHAC, I would like you to know that we have a team dedicated to building a supportive and innovative program to be both a voice for the new generation as well as a nurturing community. YTHAC was formed to broaden our network, increase awareness, and create opportunities for collaboration with other arbitration communities worldwide. Among the respectable goals we have, I personally believe the most crucial and meaningful one is to empower the next generation, our young practitioners, because the youth of today will become future leaders. It is paramount that an official forum is provided to share ideas and experiences. And to create a successful forum, I believe that all parts of the community must be included, both the young and the experienced, to have real positive change by engaging the younger generation and providing valuable knowledge through the guidance of experienced practitioners. In this way, the webinar we are holding today is very befitting, and I see it as investing in our future. I would also like to note that this is the first of many exciting initiatives to come, so please stay tuned. Once again, I wish to take this opportunity to encourage and invite all of you who are interested in area of arbitration to join us as a member of YTHAC. Membership is free and the application is simple. You will only need to access through the official website of THAC and look for YTHAC section. Then fill in your contact information in the YTHAC application form. Turning back to today's sessions, it was designed with our priority on the young generation. We'll be looking at how to kick off a successful career, learning from the challenges that our expert panelists faced and overcame, and exploring how you can pave your own way in arbitration. As for myself, I started my interest in arbitration back in 1996 as a junior associate in a domestic arbitration. That was the first time I learned about alternative dispute resolution, that a hearing could be conducted before a tribunal who did not have to wear gowns. However, today's session is not for me to tell you about my story. We have with us today 4 outstanding arbitration practitioners who will tell you their success stories, which I promise will be interesting and entertaining. I am certain by now that you are curious to know as to how our panelists have also made their way to where they are today. Without further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to our moderator, Kun Prin Manasak. Kun Prin Kap, over to you.
Greetings from Thailand. Greetings to all participants and panelists. As introduced, I'm Prin, and I'm truly honored and excited to be your moderator for the next part of our program. Today, we have carefully selected our panelists in order to bring to you seasoned arbitrator, arbitration counsel, founders and members of social platforms relating to arbitration institutions who are able to reach the height of their career at such a relatively young age. They will discuss and share with you today how they started a career in arbitration in hope to spark your interest in the field and put you participants to the same exciting and fruitful journeys. And I believe our panelists have currently tuned in from across the globe. Just a quick short introduction. We have today with us Amanda Lee, who is the founder of Career in Arbitration and director of Arbitral Women, currently based in London. We also have with us Mario Dimsey, co-head of CMS International Arbitration and also a partner at CMS Hong Kong. We also have Vanina Sucharit-Gun, our very own co-president of YTHAC. And last but not least, Kun Warathorn Wong-Sawang-Sri, partner at Herbert Smith and Freehills, Bangkok office. Well, please excuse my brevity of introduction. If I'd named all of their memberships, it would likely take the entire screen time. Before we begin, participants and attendees, please feel free to send your questions, which will be answered and picked up during the Q&A session at the end of our panel discussion. Just a quick run through of our program today. We have prepared a list of questions that cover 3 main topics. First, personal account of our panelists' success stories. Second, questions and recommendations for young practitioners or multi-jurisdictional practitioners. And 3, tips and tricks in getting a mentor, networking, and recommended toolkits. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask the first question, an ice-breaking questions to each of our panelists. What was the path that led you to international arbitration? So perhaps, Amanda, perhaps you can begin by answering this question.
Sure, Prin, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak to you all today. Thank you to you all for tuning in to listen. I usually describe my path into international arbitration as a case of delegation. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to work on an arbitration during my first year of practice, and I never looked back. That was how my journey began. I didn't have a light bulb moment in which I decided, yes, I'm going to pursue international arbitration as a career. This is the way forward. And the many students that I meet nowadays who've decided so early in their academic careers that they know that international arbitration is the field for them are much more organized than I ever was. I was lucky. I had the opportunity to practice in this field alongside my practice in litigation. And I've taken things from there, becoming an arbitrator subsequently, setting up careers in arbitration, getting involved with fantastic organizations like Arbitral Women, the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and many more. So that's a little insight into how I got started.
Thanks, Amanda. Oh, and in short, I'll probably refer to you as Mandy, moving forward, right?
Thank you, Fred.
Yeah. Perhaps Mario, you can share your own thoughts on how did you started, what path led you to international arbitration. Mario?
Sure, thank you, Prin. And I should also echo Amanda's thanks to the Thailand Arbitration Center and to Young THAC for inviting me today. And can I just say, I'm looking at the chat here and the number of jurisdictions and people from all over the world who are represented. This is just amazing. And it really shows one of the nice sides of the pandemic that's going on right now, if there is a nice side, that people can get together in this way and we can really have a global discussion, which I'm really looking forward to. From my perspective, my introduction was, funnily enough, the Vismoot. It was back in 2000 and 2001 that I competed. I was in Australia at a law school there and was looking for ways to leave Australia, to be very honest. And I applied for the moot team and got in and went to Vienna. There was no Hong Kong moot back then, and realized what a wonderful opportunity and what a wonderful area this was to work in an international area, meet people from all over the world. And I didn't have a light bulb moment, Amanda or Mandy. It was more sort of a gradual progression, but that was definitely my first introduction, and just try to follow that up until today. And there's a lot we're going to discuss about various aspects of careers, but for everyone listening, that's just a brief introduction of how I first got started.
Thank you very much, Mariel. Vanina, do you have something to share as well?
Yes, for me, I always knew I wanted to pursue something international, either in an international organization or within the private sector. Being born in Paris, raised in Thailand, and educated in San Francisco, this was something I always knew. So I tried a few internships in international organizations with the UN and in The Hague, and I realized that perhaps an international organization wasn't quite suited for me. So then I wanted to do the international disputes route. And my second year of law school, I had a summer associate position at Morrison Foerster, but I was in the Silicon Valley office, and I kept asking if I could work on arbitration cases. The main partner was in San Francisco, so I was allowed to work on arbitration cases. Now, I took a very rare career risk. When I received an offer to join as a graduate, a full-time offer where they would pay for my bar studies and for everything, I did not accept my offer. And I waited until the last minute, till the partners came to me. And one of the things that the law firms will post is how many offers are given and how many are accepted. So the partner came to me and said, "Why are you not accepting the offer?" And I said, "Well, your office doesn't do arbitration." And so they said, "Well, what can we do for you to accept the offer?" And then I said, "Well, if you change the offer to the San Francisco office." And that was how I was put in the office that does arbitration work. Now, I realized that in California, you still don't completely do arbitration work full time. So the only way I could do it full time was to move away from the US, where I wasn't qualified to go to court. So that was my path.
Thank you very much, Vanina. I understand that each of the panelists would more or less would have that light bulb moment to know that you wanted to start arbitration ever since you are students like Mario, or when like Vanina, some certain calling. And Kun Varathon, I believe that you have a totally different path in terms of arbitration, that you didn't have such a calling in the beginning.
Yes, everyone. I would say that my path might be slightly different from others. I go up my career more from local litigation and local arbitration. Actually, my first role model is Kun Pisut Atkakamon, our YTHAC, when I was at Baker McKenzie for summer clerk and as summer clerk. Otherwise, I will be NGO for today. And that time I adore the arbitration practitioner. But at the first beginning, might be on the local arbitration. And with my previous law firm, WCP in Thailand, I focused on the beginning of my career on local litigation and local arbitration. But sometime during the career, after some experience on local litigation and arbitration, my big boss, Kun Virawong Mitrapap, suggest and advise me that you should pursue more on international arbitration, in which at that time in Thailand, just only a few person who practice in this area. And I got support to second to Wong Partnership, one famous law firm in Singapore for some time. And I know many people and work as a counsel in international arbitration there. So my path will start with local and then turn into the international arbitration after get more experience, especially after they have arbitration focusing on Thai governing law. That's how I start my career on international arbitration.
Thank you very much, Kunraton. Since we already are talking about international arbitration, perhaps each of our panelists can share with us today, what is your first sort of like experience in international arbitration? So perhaps would it be a case that you're working on? Would it be like, a clerkship, or would it be some sort of a totally different setting? Perhaps we can start with Mandy.
Sure, Prin. My first arbitration case involved paper recycling. I do quite a lot of work in the recycling sector, which meant that during the earliest stages of my career, I was constantly talking about landfill sites and other very smelly facilities, which was great fun. And so my main memory of that experience was a lot of debate about the scope of document production. Everybody talks a lot about document production in international arbitration. I remember spending a lot of time patiently trying to explain to the other side that certain documents did not exist, even though they were absolutely convinced that the documents existed. So it's always very difficult to prove a negative, and that was my first exciting experience of the world of arbitration. Not the most memorable one, of course, but a good debate to have.
Right. Thanks, Mandy. Mariel?
Thanks, Prin. Well, I actually have my first case was one that's very relevant to many in the audience and also on the panel right now. My first case as a practitioner was the Walter Bao against Thailand case, in which Vanina's grandfather was actually our expert on Thai law. So that was how I originally met Vanina. So this is a very apt forum to discuss that. But when I started as a junior associate in 2007, my first task basically was to prepare for a jurisdictional hearing that was taking place in Hong Kong 6 weeks later. So it really was a baptism of fire for me. And my main memory of that time was just being incredibly overwhelmed and having no idea what I was doing. And then sitting in this hearing in Hong Kong, I wasn't allowed to speak, which was good for everyone, I think. But I'm sitting there with our esteemed tribunal, including Marc Lalonde, who was the former finance minister of Canada, and just being very in awe of what was going on, and also quite fearful that I maybe had bitten off more than I could chew. But it was a very good start to a career, and something that I have tried to emulate since then, but it's very rare to get a case of that caliber, but it was great.
Thanks, Mariel. Oh, I believe there's no better person to begin answering responding to Mariel than Vanina. Like, your path has crossed in the beginning of your careers. Like, Vanina, is your first experience in arbitration the same as Mariel?
Well, it's actually from following my grandfather around to hearings, because at that hearing in Hong Kong where Mariel was, I was my grandfather's luggage holder. So ever since I was young, my grandfather was an exit arbitrator and an international law professor who started an LLM and SJD program after he retired from being ambassador. So I would always take care of my grandparents and follow them around, and he would tell me about international arbitration. So that's why I basically knew from a very young age that I would be a lawyer. And then Mariel and I met in Paris, and she recognized my last name, and she asked me, "Are you related to Sompong Sucharit-Gun?" And that's how we became friends. But the first case I worked on was actually an investment case relating to expropriation in Colombia. So that was back in San Francisco. And of course, it was the most exciting thing ever.
Thanks, Vanina. Kun Varathon.
I think my first get involved in international arbitration is my first HKIAC case in Hong Kong. I was mid-level something. Before that, I do only local litigation or local arbitration, but I got assignment to help our big name law firm. We represent kind of the co-arbitrator, counsel advising on Thai law. And at that time, it's my first course examination, conduct course examination, local Thai law expert, and also do the closing statement on Thai law part. I was checking because it's my first time for international arbitration with big name. The opposite party is one of the biggest, largest law firm in Korea. But at the end of the day, after checking, I think I did a good job, and then get involved and more confident on that, and more arbitration case later on.
Right.
That's my first case.
All right, thank you very much, Konraton. So now that we have a bit of a flavor as to where our panelists are coming from, so perhaps each panelist can share with us challenges that the panelists have faced along the way. Because your bio have only talked about your successes, but it left out the most important thing in your career, which is the challenges. So what would be the biggest challenge in international arbitration that each of you have faced, and how did you manage to overcome them? So, perhaps Konraton, you can begin.
Yep. I think one of the challenges is to obtain coaching in Thailand at that time. Because at my previous law firm, we only practice kind of local litigation and local arbitration. Just only few people in Thailand did like arbitration. So at that time, it's quite challenging to have like coaching. So no coaching at all. But because I interested in arbitration, so I study. And what I learned is like when we act as a co-counsel, I learned a lot of international law firm, international lawyer. For example, I work with Wong Partnership, Alvin Yo. I work with like Morgan Lewis Stamford. Work with Latham Watkin in many cases. And also not only learn from like the co-counsel, but we also learn from the opposite counsel. Because when we face with like really famous like counsel, opposite of the table or opposite on the bench, then we can learn from them too. That I think that the challenge in Thailand. But nowadays I think it's more and more practitioner, and you can find easier coaching and practitioner in Thailand to like how to start with international arbitration in Thailand. I think this day is like easier than the previous. That's my answer to this question.
Right. Thank you very much, Konraton. Like with respect to coaching and mentorship, like I believe we have prepared some sort of questions at the end in like tips and tricks on how to find a mentor and with respect to coaching. And Mandy with us today is also a founder of the page called Career in Arbitration. And I believe that Konraton had mentioned that in the past, there have been a few resources that you can perhaps benefit from in terms of arbitration. But perhaps Mandy, you can share with us a bit of the page and initiatives that you have found like later on in the panel. And yeah, now that you have been mentioned, Mandy, like what would be the challenges and how did you overcome them in international arbitration?
Well, the challenge I'm going to mention is a challenge that could apply equally to almost any area of practice, but I think it's particularly important in the field of international arbitration. I used to be absolutely terrified of public speaking. And a career in international arbitration depends quite heavily on being able to do things like this, being able to talk to other people in complete sentences without turning bright red and breaking out in hives or generally having a panic attack. And I was absolutely terrified of public speaking. And so I decided a few years ago in about 2012 that it was probably time that I dealt with this. It was getting a little bit silly now, and I needed to be able to stand up and speak at events and things like that. And of course, if you're going to speak to a tribunal, they do expect you to do it without fainting. So I got over it by forcing myself to go and obtain what we refer to as higher rights of audience in England and Wales. Solicitors in England and Wales do not have the right to appear in the higher courts. And so you have to take additional exams in order to be able to do that. So I forced myself to spend time doing the thing that I hated the most, the part of law school that terrified me. I went and I subjected myself to a sort of intense ordeal. I passed my exams, and in November, I'm finally going to appear in the Privy Council, which is one of our sort of very top level courts. So that's I think I've just about got over my fear of public speaking, as you can hopefully tell from the fact that I'm speaking to all of you now. But it's really important, and lots of young law students are terrified of public speaking and think that this is something that more senior practitioners have never suffered from. So I try to be honest about the fact that that was one of my really big challenges earlier in my career.
Well, we have seen a good contrast between the challenges that each of our panelists faced. Well, like Mandy's challenges come from a more personal perspective, like, how did she personally had overcame her fear of public speaking? Vanina, do you have the similar sort of challenges?
Mine is a different one because I went to law school in the US, and I did US litigation for a long time. And the US style litigation is very different. So when I moved to Thailand, I was tasked with drafting a letter to opposing counsel, where opposing counsel did a massive mistake of relying on the UNCITRAL model law and not the UNCITRAL Arbitration Act. So I wrote a letter completely chastising the opposing counsel. And I showed it to my boss, and he said, "You cannot write like this. The opposing counsel is old and senior and older than you." And I thought, what is this? The American style, you would completely, you know, just go gun blazing to the other side. But, you know, you have to adapt to the culture. Where in Thailand, if you write a cease and desist letter in America, we hereby demand, otherwise we would have no choice but pursue legal proceedings within 14 days. When I write in Thai, would be, please, can you just not use our trademark? You know, it's adapting to the cultural style. And I think this is one of the beauty of international arbitration, is that you work with different legal cultures and different customs. So I had to tone down my American litigator side, but every once in a while, when my Thai boss felt disrespected, he would say, Vanina, do your American thing. And I'll just raise my hand and say, objection. So yes, I think that was the transition from the first time to Thailand.
Right. Yeah. I think the multicultural aspect of international arbitration is really interesting and would be one of the topics that we would be touching upon in today's program. And Mariel, do you have any challenges that you've faced, or is it an easy cruise for you?
I think I've discovered from Mandy's tips that I still face that challenge every time I have to open an arbitration hearing, especially if you're first. I am terrified. If you're a respondent and you know you've got a couple of hours to sort of gather your thoughts, it's okay. But when you are the first person up, I am still terrified today. So I'm glad that Mandy has managed to overcome that challenge. With respect to, I think, you know, in line with this being a careers webinar, one of the points that I really struggled with when I was more junior was accepting criticism and turning it around and really learning from it. Because I think, I hope I'm speaking to a lot of junior lawyers out there, you know, you finish law school, you think you're going pretty well, and then you hand your first draft to your boss and it comes back just covered in red ink and all of these little symbols that you don't understand. And it can be very disheartening the first few times. And I remember myself being absolutely affronted that my boss had dared to, you know, put that much red ink over my draft. But now that I'm in a different position and I'm the person putting the red ink on the draft, I do see how people that I'm checking the work for respond to it in a similar way. And I do think it's a challenge that everyone needs to overcome in their careers. This is a very specific, a very creative kind of work. You're working with people who have their own very specific personal styles. So I think, I mean, for me, I still, you know, get criticized from different areas and it's never pleasant, but I think it's something that all of us can benefit from, to listen to what other people have to say about what you're doing, even if you don't agree with them, but it gives you pause to think about what they're saying and see if you can improve.
You know, well, as a junior lawyer myself, I totally can relate to where you're coming from, and I find your tips really useful. So, right. Now that we know a bit of our panelists, if we can move on to the next question, which would be, how would you define a career in arbitration? I understand that each of you guys come from a different background, you know, even different culture. For the purpose of this speaker of this forum, how would you define career in arbitration? Perhaps we can start with Vanina.
Well, I think there's different aspects of a career in arbitration. I would say majority start off as counsel and then at some point in their career start getting appointments as arbitrator once they have established themselves. But some take the institutional route where they actually spend their entire life working in arbitral institutions. So there are different sides of international arbitration. Doesn't just mean an arbitrator or an arbitration counsel, but it's different aspects relating to arbitration.
Right. Mandy, do you share the same view as Vanina?
Absolutely. My definition is as inclusive as possible. You can define your career in international arbitration however you wish, however tangentially your role relates to the field. I think you're perfectly welcome to regard yourself as having a career in that field. You don't even need to be a lawyer. Many arbitrators are not lawyers. You can work for a firm, for an organization. You can work in a related field such as compliance. You can undertake arbitration work alongside other areas of practice. I still regard myself as a litigator, even though most people know me best through my international arbitration work. So
All right,
everybody's welcome. That's what I say.
Thank you. Kun Rathon?
Yeah, I start career with litigation and local arbitration, and then international arbitration. And sometime after you have some reputation, and now I got appointed as arbitrator in some case, both locally and also globally. So, but maybe at some point I met with other arbitrator now. For example, like the professor at local university in Thailand, and they also got like appointed as arbitrator. So the career might different from each of you, but from my view, I be counsel first and appointed arbitrator.
I see. I believe that this responses are very useful as we began to receive some Q&As from the participants and attendees as well. And if we can perhaps plug in those questions, then I would. And if not, then your question would be picked up towards the end of our panel. So Mario, can you share with us your definition of career in arbitration?
And I think I can answer one of the questions that's come up, which is, I mean, very generally and also from my own personal perspective, what are the steps to become an arbitrator? First of all, let me start by emphasizing that I think what everyone has said basically is what I was going to say, in the sense that everyone has their own path. There's no right or wrong career in arbitration, and indeed it would be a very odd profession if there was. I had a quite academic start to my career because I did two postgraduate degrees after leaving university in Australia. And then I mainly went the private practitioner route and had a brief stint at the ICC. But just to come back on Vanina's point, the ICC was not for me. I didn't enjoy an institution, which had nothing to do with what I was doing, but I missed private practice work. And so I went back to it very quickly. In terms of what to do to become an arbitrator, I get this question a lot. If I could give a couple of pieces of advice, don't want to be an arbitrator too quickly. An arbitrator needs to know what they're doing. They need to be respected by the community. They need to have extensive experience, because what will happen if you appoint very junior arbitrators, and we've had this before, is that the parties will run rings around them. So I realize for many people, and it was the same for me, the goal is when you start working in arbitration is to become an arbitrator one day. And that's a very valid goal, but don't be too quick to do it. Make sure you gain the skills that you need initially to actually be a good arbitrator. Because if people appoint you too early and you don't know what you're doing, that's something that's damaged your reputation that might be very, very difficult to repair later on. So that's my sense worth on that.
Right. Mario, now that you bring up the point about being an arbitrator, like not too early on in your career, like does that mean that it's impossible to be a young arbitrator, or would you say that age has nothing to do with experience?
Not at all. I mean, I feel slightly hypocritical in what I'm saying, because my first appointment was in 2008 when I was a second year PQE associate. But I was very aware of the limits of my knowledge and skills, and thankfully had a very supportive partner behind me who I could ask questions of. It was an institutional appointment, as many of them are for your first appointment. And it was the ICC back then, and the counsel there knew exactly that they were dealing with a very inexperienced practitioner, and basically checked everything for me, showed me what to do, gave me templates, didn't interfere with the decision-making, which is not something they did at all, but was really sort of gave me a helping hand. I mean, this is not a blanket piece of advice, and I'm sure my other panelists have other advice, but this was just my personal experience and some things I learned from it.
Right. Thank you, Mario. And Kun Rathon, I believe you mentioned that you have been in the past appointed as an arbitrator. Like, how old were you? And do you agree that you shouldn't be appointed too early on in your arbitration career as an arbitrator?
Yes, as like Mario just mentioned, arbitrator is a lonely job. You cannot discuss a lot of the detail with other. Actually, I just was appointed like last year. My first arbitration case is quite really lonely. Cannot even your boss, you cannot disclose any information to them. So I have to ask like someone at the institution and also my other boss to ask some advice without disclosure or something. So I agree with Mario that no need to be like try to like be arbitrator as fast as possible, but if you like ready, then you can be the good arbitrator, and the party can rely on you, not take some risk on that. That's my advice.
I see. Vanina, do you think, like, when do you think is a person having a career in international arbitration is ready to become an arbitrator?
I think it really depends on the skills and experience. I was first approached, I think at about close to 30 or at 30 for an ICC appointment, but I had to turn it down because I was moving to Paris. The case was in Thailand. It was for a sole arbitrator case. My first arbitrator appointment was as I was party appointed, so was co-arbitrator. And some of the other ones are by institutions outside of Thailand. I would say that a big part of getting an arbitrator appointment is raising your profile and getting your profile known within the arbitration community amongst other lawyers and with other arbitrators. So that takes years and years of networking, but also being known as a very good lawyer. It's about having the technical skills first. I think there's now a push for diversity in the sense of not just gender diversity, regional diversity, but also generational diversity. You see younger and younger arbitrators being appointed. I don't necessarily see in their 20s, but you see arbitrators in their mid-30s, I would say, getting appointed more and more by institutions to pave way for second generations of arbitrators so that you don't have all the same names being appointed all the time. But networking skills are very important, and sometimes being known so that when an arbitrator is conflicted out, and having your own brand is very important. You know, what is your unique selling point so that for a particular dispute, you're the only person that they can think of.
Thank you very much, Vanina. I like the flow of this panel discussion because, like, you know, I've prepared a set of questions and grouped them into topics, but then, like, you know, each response is truly is with triggers and other questions that is in totally different set of questions. So now that Vanina have mentioned networking skills, Mandy, perhaps you can share with us your views on the topic first as to whether or not like an arbitrator could be young, and perhaps share with us some tips and tricks of how to be strong in networking, since I believe that you have your fair share of networking as well.
Sure. I have no issue with arbitrators being young as long as they have the requisite skills and experience. I do know people who have sat as arbitrator in their 20s. They tend to be people who have, for example, a background as a former professional athlete. So they may be appointed by a sporting organization, so they sit in sports cases. I think I had my first appointment when I was about 32, possibly, but I turned down a couple before that. One of the things I always say to aspiring arbitrators is don't discount small claims arbitration schemes. If you have the opportunity to sit as an arbitrator in a small domestic arbitration scheme, for example, do not discount those opportunities simply because they're not as glamorous as the international appointments. I think I've come across some of the strangest and most complicated issues in small arbitration cases. The bigger institutional cases, you tend to have a lot more support, whereas for the smaller cases, you're the sole arbitrator. You're out there in the long, tall grass trying to resolve random jurisdictional challenges and quasi-expert evidence issues and so on and so forth. So there are no small cases. I'm a small arbitrator because I'm very short, so I'm allowed to say that. but generally there are no small cases and there are no small arbitrators. So seize any opportunity you can find to get that experience. Do not be too grand to say, you know what, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to seize this small opportunity. I'm going to cut my teeth on it. As for networking used to be the bane of my existence. It's very closely linked to public speaking because it involves speaking in sentences to other people that you do not know. I'm British, so I'm one of these people who likes to stand in the corner like a wallflower, hoping that somebody will come up and talk to me. And so I had to develop tips and tricks that help me cope with networking events. So one of the strange tips that I developed over the years was I'd go up to people at events and I would say, hello, this is a very interesting discussion about arbitration, wasn't it? Let's talk about something completely different. What's your weirdest hobby? And they'd go, what? My weirdest hobby? What? That's really strange. And I'd go, come on, everybody's got one. You've got a weird hobby. Tell me what your weirdest hobby is. And eventually I would tell them, I dance Argentine tango, which some people think is quite weird. And they would come around and they would kind of get into it and they'd get a bit competitive and they'd be like, I must have a weirder hobby than you. And so before you know it, you're having an actual conversation with another human being about something that's not related to arbitration. The key to networking, I think, is building a genuine connection. It's building a professional relationship with another human being. So you have to find a way of connecting on another level. And so I always try and get to know that person personally. I'm also very strategic when it comes to networking. I am not one of these people who goes around with an enormous stack of business cards, making it rain all across the room, talking to everybody around me. I try to talk to 2 or 3 people and to talk to them for a sensible period of time so I can actually begin building a relationship. Of course, these are tips that work quite well in person. They don't work quite so well during this exciting COVID environment in which we all find ourselves, where we all have to network via virtual means. I could give you lots and lots of tips about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably one of my special subjects because I set up careers in arbitration, which is essentially a virtual networking platform. I can go on, but I'm conscious that others probably have their own tips to add on networking, and we might come back to LinkedIn. So I'm in your hands, Bryn.
Right, we'll definitely come up like for LinkedIn. We'll come around to LinkedIn. And now that you mentioned about networking and physical networking, Mario, I believe that you mentioned that you have met with Vanina and your introduction was, wait, your last name was quite familiar. Are you related to this arbitrator in this case? Is that how you introduced yourself to Vanina, and how does that link to your, like, is there any tips that you want to share about networking?
Well, that was a chance networking event with Vanina, and it wasn't really a networking event. We were both, I was working at the ICC at the time, and Vanina and I were both excused from the court meeting because we were conflicted, because it related to the case that I'd been working on. And we were standing outside, banished from the room, and just started chatting in the corridor. So that was also a very fortuitous networking event by all means. For networking, I think I would actually say my approach to networking is very unstrategic, although it sounded quite similar to Mandy's strategic networking. I have a difficulty that I speak to people I like, and you can usually glean very quickly from a networking situation the people who are just out to throw their business cards in the air and make sure they distribute as many as possible and then vanish from the meeting and you'll get an email 2 days later, or people who actually are interested in what you're doing and strike up a conversation. So the way Mandy was saying, but I don't think there's any gem to networking. I think you just need to be open to it. And if you're going to an event and you don't want to network, I do sometimes wonder why you go. I always wonder in Hong Kong at some events, people always get up and leave straight after the presentation. And I'm always like, the presentation was great, but I'm here to meet people. I want to know who my peers are. I want to know who's new to Hong Kong and doesn't know the ropes yet, and maybe I can help them out and develop a relationship that way. So I think you just need to, if you're going to network, you need to do it properly, and that's what will come out of it.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to share a personal account of how I met Mario. That would also relate on how I met Vanina as well. Like I think Vanina, I think I met you in one of the ICC networking events, and then we then kept in contact because, you know, like building network is about being personal. And then you then introduced me to Mario, in which I have a coffee meetup with in Hong Kong during my, my Hong Kong visit. So that's really just a glimpse of networking and how interconnected this world can be. Kun Raton, perhaps do you share Mario or Amanda's view of being, strategic or unstrategic, but have to be personally tailored to each of the net person that you're networking with?
Normally, networking for Thai people is quite difficult. For the Thai people, we are quite really shy. I am also like that. Normally, my first networking I just want whiskey and just want to stand in one of the corner of the room. But after that, I think the most important is not giving the name cards, but to build the friends. I help many people when they got in trouble, ask some free advice for Thai law, and we build up more on connection on that. Also, when I work with on the opposite party, opposite counsel, after the work, then we can be kind of friends, and we share some knowledge each other and build more relationship. I don't have many networking, but I have some friends in many jurisdictions, and if you have need some help, and we can call and start to build more relationship. Especially many friends in Singapore, I build relationship with to help them, give some free advice, know them well, have some relaxing party together sometime. That how to build the networking. But for my personal, it's quite difficult for me when to have to giving name card and chit and chat after the long and really try at seminar or something like that. That's my perspective. That might different from others.
All right, thank you very much, Kun Raton, and particularly, Verena, please.
Yes, I'd like to add a little bit of that because this is something that I tell my LLM students all the time. I make sure my class is both practical and also substantive. So I give them a package from the first day about how to craft their CV, how to network, how to do informal interviews, etc. So I tell my students, you have to go to a conference and then go greet one of the speakers and then ask them for their business card and say, would you mind meeting for coffee so I can get some advice from you and learn more about your practice? And this is so not French, and my students refuse to do it. But then the following week, one of my students came up to me and said, oh my God, Isabelle Michoud, one of this very famous partner in Paris, who used to be at Herbert Smith and now at Quinn Emanuel, agreed to have coffee with me. And I said, well, that's wonderful. I told you, people don't say no because they love talking about themselves. And if you tell them that you want to learn more about them, they will not disagree. They usually don't turn you down. So this is more for young practitioners who want to get to know partners. In terms of other types of networking, is for younger practitioners, also network with others in your peers. You don't know later on, these are the people who are going to appoint you as arbitrators. These are going to be people who refer you, and building a small community is very small. Gather small groups for drinks, have informal. That's what I did when I first moved to Hong Kong. I would ask one person, well, who else should I meet? Would you mind introducing me to that person? And then from that, you start building your network.
All right, thank you very much, Vanina. Your point actually led me to the next part of the set of questions that I prepared, which is particularly tailored for young practitioners who are attending our panel for today, which is, like a concrete, practical tips and tricks for and how to begin a career in arbitration. I have seen some of the questions that are asking about, they have graduated from this, from LLM, looking to start a career in arbitration. What should I do next? So this question would be, to phrase this question, to make it echoes to all of the participants, the question would be, how do each of the panelists recommend young practitioners to set their career goals in international arbitration? Perhaps Kun Raton, perhaps you can recommend how to set those goals to young practitioners.
Sure. Normally, like what Disney says that you have to courage to have some dream and pursue them. So if you would like to get involved in international arbitration, sure, you can set your goal. and but the most important thing is you have some goal, but you have to like try to achieve bit by bit. You think about the big dream, big goal, but when you like day to day improvement, day by day and bit by bit, and you feel you achieve something a little bit, and then you happy and want to pursue more. So I recommend to all of like a student or like new joiner to international arbitration, you can set the big goal, but you can like achieve and happy bit by bit. For example, you're happy to participate in some event about international arbitration, or you happy to discuss with like your very like famous arbitrator you met or discuss with them, or you happy with help some part of the case, even though it's very small issue like researching something, but you part of the picture. And if you, when you feel really happy and then you want to pursue more, like myself, I get involved in a little bit like just one very little piece in international arbitration, but after I succeed one thing, you want to pursue more. That I would say I recommend that young practitioner set big goal and try to pursue bit by bit, and you will feel happy and achieve when you achieve something.
All right, so short-term goals, and then which led you to a more bigger goals. Mandy, perhaps you can share with us your views of how do you set goals in career.
I think the first thing that you have to accept is you're going to have to work very, very hard for quite a long time in order to achieve the sort of levels of success that you might hope to achieve. I don't say that to be mean. I don't say that to scare anyone. I say that to be realistic, because this is an incredibly, incredibly competitive field. And to succeed, you have to really, really, really want to succeed. It will not surprise anybody that I'm very strategic about things. If I'm strategic with networking, it makes sense that I would also be strategic when it comes to setting goals. And so I generally recommend to the students that I mentor that what they do is they effectively make themselves a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. Working out the steps that you need to take to get there is very important. And as we've discussed, it's a combination of small steps in order to get to those bigger steps. What you also need to have is a backup plan. Because if your plan of joining X fantastic international law firm doesn't quite work out for whatever reason, and it may be that it doesn't work out because you can't get a visa. It may be it doesn't work out because the partner that you wanted to work with has moved somewhere else and suddenly the job doesn't look like quite as appealing a prospect. It may be that you have family commitments and something happens and you have to stay at home and look after a family member, or you have a kid and you decide, you know what, I can't take up that job at the moment. You need to be able to course correct. So you've got to have layers of goals. You've got to have backups. You've got to be really, really strategic. You've got to be able to adjust. It's a little bit like advocacy. You're making an argument and suddenly the other side comes up with something new and they throw it at you and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't anticipate that. You've got to anticipate that in advance. You've got to plan. You've got to be able to adjust your goals accordingly. So be strategic, but see the big picture and just keep heading for that point on the horizon. Keep heading for that goal that you want to achieve.
Thank you very much, Mandy. I feel that we are painting a picture here. So Waratan came up and said, hey, we have to have a short-term goal, which led you to a bigger goal. Mandy comes up and say, hey, we need backup plan, which also still, keeps your heads up to that bigger goals, which is your horizon. Vanina, we have perhaps something to add to the picture.
Yes, I'm the complete opposite. I just knew that I wanted to practice in multiple jurisdictions in different countries. I didn't know how it would happen, but I'm one of those, I believe it's going to happen, and then it just kind of happens. In 2008, I was here in Paris, and I told myself one day I will be living in Paris again, driving a white Fiat 500. And then somehow, all of a sudden, I was asked, you want to go work in Paris? So I think I just kind of believed, and then it sort of happened. So my plan is a little bit different. And then I really wanted to get a PhD, and somehow all the things led to it happening. And right now I'm in my last chapter of my PhD, and that was a massive, massive project. So I'm not very good with being strategic. I'm less organized. I'm one of those, I don't know. So I should be following Mandy's advice and Kunraton's advice. I'm just very bad at that.
Right. I mean, like we're branching out here, right? So we have a strategic, a backup plan, and then we have Vanina coming from a totally spontaneous point of view, which also led to the same sort of goal. And so at the end of the day, Mario, do you have something to add? Like, do you subscribe to which of the views, or would you come up with the third route?
I think this is the benefit of going last. I subscribe to all of those views.
Nice.
I think, I mean, from my perspective, any career, and this is not arbitration specific, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You need to be patient. This goes to what everyone said about backup plans, being able to correct your course if things don't go to plan. And also taking on a bit of Vanina's sort of spontaneity, or it will all be all right at the end, and just accepting opportunities as they come along. But I think from the perspective of people starting out, your first priority needs to be honing your skills and getting good at what you do. Because I do firmly believe that if you do that, good things come from that. Be reliable, be responsive, be fair. Try and improve wherever you can. Reach out to the right people. Sometimes you'll reach out to the wrong people and you'll see that things are going nowhere. Know when to cut your losses then. But I think if you just concentrate on being a good practitioner, knowing your stuff, getting your name out there where it makes sense, you will get opportunities that come your way along the way. And you also need to be prepared that things won't necessarily always go to plan, but then another opportunity will come up. So for me, I never really had a plan. I'd say at the moment I have a sort of 3 to 5 year plan, but when I was younger, I had no plan at all. I was really just seeing where it was all going to take me. Thankfully for me, I'm very happy with where I am right now. But there were a few bumps along the way, so you just have to be a bit nimble when it comes to those kind of things.
Right. So Mario's coming from a adaptability perspective. Like you just, while subscribing to both of the views, you just also wanted to sort of adapt as you see, as your plans comes to a change. So now that we talked about a wider picture of how do you achieve the end goal, like I believe that some participants have been asking the questions: how do you take that first step into career in arbitration? Like as a new graduate, like do you suggest attending networking events on held by international institutions like arbitration institutions, or do you suggest like reaching out right away to seasoned arbitrators, or just join a law firm and join someone's practice? How did that works for all of you? Like any tips and recommendations to take that first practical step to career in arbitration? Perhaps Kunraton, perhaps you can begin.
For myself, I recommend that get the job. Anything. I think if you would like to get some experience on it, you need to get a job, because the lawyer work is like experiences. So join the law firm to be a secretary of the arbitrator, or join the institution to know more about arbitration, or even you will not get permanent job, but at least to be the intern, to get familiar with what they do in the practice international arbitration, and you will learn more. Especially for the student who not get involved in what we practice, you might not see in the picture, but at least when you get involved to get a job, small job, little job that we find, and you will know whether you would like to pursue in this field or not. Like Mandy mentioned that in this field, you have to work really hard, work really, really hard, and sometimes it's not easy job. So, but if you love it, then you can pursue it more and more. But if you're not happy, not your way, then you can decide. You have backup plan to go to other career. That's my recommendation.
All right, thank you, Kunraton. Vanina, do you have something to add?
Yes, I think as students, you should try to do a number of things. Okay, we're talking about recent graduates, right? So as students, if you have the chance, a number of institutions take student internships, like the ICC, I don't know about other arbitral institutions. Having that on your CV would be advantageous. So this is a very competitive field. So make yourself stand out as much as possible. Participate in the MOOD program. And I think what Mandy has mentioned during our call, that now with everything being virtual, you can get additional trainings as well. And for example, you can join this webinar from everywhere. We've seen people from Africa, from Peru, from India, from everywhere, right? And also be creative. I have one researcher in India right now who had an internship in Germany, but he's stuck because of COVID. And he reached out to me, and right now he's working with me during the time where he's in confinement. So we also have to take the pandemic into consideration at the moment and how to be creative. So another way is being a researcher for an arbitrator. So you can be a tribunal secretary, you can work for an institution, you can work for a law firm. But if you work for a law firm, try to work for, if you don't get an arbitration spot, get a litigation spot. If you go transactional, then you're not acquiring the same skills, because litigation and arbitration are not that different. It requires the same set of skills. And also be flexible about jurisdictions. Don't just think of where you're living, but there are jobs out there in many other countries. So this is where flexibility comes into play.
All right, thank you very much, Vanina. Mario, perhaps you can share with us a bit, as a partner of a law firm. Like, would you be appreciating a graduate who have interest in arbitration, and how would you also recommend such recent graduate to take that first practical step?
It's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. I mean, we get a lot of applications from people with very different profiles, and there's no trusted and true graduate profile that we would hire. I'm seeing some of the questions that are coming up in the chat. For example, a specialized arbitration LLM is always a bonus. Having said that, we have had graduates who've joined us with specialized LLMs, and they have not been as technically competent as people who didn't have an LLM, for example. So it doesn't, all I'm trying to say is, of course, go and get your LLM, but don't see that as sort of the be all and end all of what you need to have. And it's certainly not going to necessarily disadvantage you if you don't have it. For us, however, the LLM, depending on where it's been taken, is also an indication of English language skills. And for us, I mean, most of the work we do is in English, at least in the region that I operate in. I'm not capable of doing the Chinese arbitrations, which is my own shortcoming, but we do expect good English. And I know that Kunwara Tornana and myself, we discussed ways that we could give constructive criticism to people who don't necessarily have good English when they finish university. And there are ways to improve that, of course, and it's not an absolute knockout criterion. But I do think these are the kind of things people need to be aware of. But just to come back to your initial point, we want people to have shown an interest in arbitration. You'd be surprised how many applications we get where people very clearly don't even know what we do. They just want a job, and I can totally understand that they just want a job, but we're not going to give a job to someone who has not even pretended they have an interest in international arbitration. So if you've done a course, or you've done an internship at the HKIAC or the ICC, or you did a couple of arbitration focused subjects at university, or you did the moot. I mean, there's no magic formula, but all of these things are things that will go some way to looking at your CV closely. And also, this is the kind of thing you need to be emphasizing in your cover letter, because sometimes we won't get through the full CV. We'll read the cover letter and we go, okay, the name of the person they've addressed it to is spelled incorrectly. They don't know what our firm does. We're not even going to go and look at the CV. So, I mean, this is a slightly different topic, and I'm assuming we might have gotten to it, but I'm dovetailing off to the side here, Prin, so apologies.
All right, no worries. My next question would be about the do's and don'ts of, tips and recommendations on how to get a job anyways. So now that you brought it up, but perhaps before we move on to the next question, Mandy, do you have a practical tips, as I believe that you have mentioned that you are also mentoring some students or graduates currently, like what are the tips and tricks that you would give to take that practical step out there?
There's a number of key things that I usually recommend that my mentees do. We've covered some of them already. Mm-hmm. The key, I'm gonna summarize my entire philosophy for how to develop a career in international arbitration in one sentence. Or a couple of sentences. You need to know your stuff, so you need to spend time honing your knowledge, and you need to keep honing your knowledge. It's a lifelong process. You need to participate in events. That means that you need to start networking at events. You need to be doing that ideally before you graduate. But hey, if you've graduated and you're getting around to it now, good for you. At least you're getting around to it. You're still earlier than I was when it came to networking. So good for you. You need to be participating in events. You need to be trying to get involved with young practitioner organizations. I expect we're going to talk a little bit more about those in due course because there are so many of them. But you need to be trying to get involved with these fantastic, super energetic groups like YTHAC from all over the world. You need to be trying to actively participate as well. You don't just want to be going, oh, I'll just sign up for the mailing list. That's great. Now I'm involved. That's not enough. You need to sign up for the mailing list. You need to go to the committee. You need to say, how can I get involved? How can I help? Can I help organize an event? Can I, plan an event at my alma mater? Can I moderate? Can I be involved as an organizer? Can I speak at my alma mater? You need to start getting those appointments and raising your profile so you can put them on your resume. And then when you're sending your resume to a law firm, they go, oh, this person's only, they've only just graduated, and look, they've already organized 5 events. They are probably going to be quite good at business development. Look at them. Look how proactive they have been. Because arbitration is it's not just about being technically proficient and being able to run a case. You also need to have business development skills. You need to be able to market both your skills and yourself. After all, many arbitration practitioners want to be arbitrators in the future. So you've got to be able to sell yourself as well as being able to sell your services as a member of a firm. And we're going to talk, I know, in a little bit about LinkedIn in due course, which of course is one of the great ways in which you can learn how to sell yourself. Not literally, of course, just your skills.
Thank you very much, Mandy. And Mariel's point that was raised really allows me to transition nicely into my next set of questions about, what would a law firm be particularly looking for in terms of their candidates? If not internship, then an associate position, junior associate position. Perhaps, Mariel have already shared her views, and so perhaps Kunraton, as a partner at an international firm, is there anything that you would particularly look for in your intern or an associate position?
Yeah, normally I have to say it depends on not only just one thing, it also depends on your opportunity and luck. I mean, normally the law firm, if we have spot a position, we will look for sure, we will see academic background, we will see the language capability, English or local language. And more than that, because nowadays a lot of good students have really good academic background and good English. So it's really competitive. So when select or pick anyone, we will have to see further than that. For example, we will see the extra curricular activities. For example, what you did when you was the student in the law school or anything. I believe that when I was picked at Baker and McKenzie and my previous law firm at the time, YTHAC and WCP, because not just because of my academic background, and my English at that time is quite really poor actually, but I have another thing, extracurricular activity. For example, I was the president of the Faculty of Law at Chulalongkorn University, who lead all the activity for the student government. That for example, that we look for, because you will have international law firm, you will have a lot of CV, and if you pick only one, you will pick someone different. That maybe in our next topic you discuss about the CV or what you present yourself when it's really competitive like this situation. Yeah, that's my answer to this.
All right, thank you very much, Kunraton. And now that you have nicely mentioned CVs, I believe CV would be the first thing, correct me if I'm wrong, that the law firms would be looking, or law firms or institutions would be looking at. And that would be a key, the first, that would get you through the next process, which is likely the interviews. I believe that Vanina can share with us some sort of the do's and don'ts of CVs, and what sort of recommendations could you give in terms of CVs? How what would be your definition of a CV that stand out off the pile? Vanina?
Okay. Yes, I review at least one CV a week because I mentor not just my students, but in my alumni program and through various people who contact me through LinkedIn and my own contact, some who are relatively senior lawyers. So I'm always reviewing CVs. The first thing I notice is that they tend to be several pages long, and no, it should only be one page. And you would be surprised that until today, people put their skills, such as Microsoft and Excel. And I always tell my students this the first day, that if you ever show me a CV with Microsoft skills, this is something that has stopped since the millennium. So do not put skills such as Microsoft, Excel, LexisNexis, Kluwer arbitration. The CV should be readable. You would be surprised how many I spot grammatical errors. Sometimes one bullet would end with a period. Sometimes it would not have a period. Consistency is key. And readability. Sometimes the font is too small. What I see the tendency is that candidates put too much in a CV. And what they don't realize is that employers only spend 30 minutes scanning through the CV. So they want to put everything in there that may not be very relevant. Sometimes I see a section of conferences that they've attended. That is not adding any value. What you really want to showcase is your skills. So I always recommend one bullet point for each skill. So if they were an intern at one law firm, you researched and drafted and then give some examples. I use the rule of 3 of what they have drafted. If they have researched and done, if they've drafted sections of pleadings, what were those pleadings? If they have researched within the law firm, what were those topics? So keep it concise and readable. And then I'm sure others will have items to add.
Mario, now as a person who reviews, many, I believe, in CVs, do you subscribe to Vanina's point of view that it should be like, it should be adding to the values as opposed to just naming any and all experiences?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very good lawyer's answer. It depends. I mean, I'd like to see, if people are just starting out in their career, they may not have necessarily a lot to put on a CV. And I perfectly understand when people may want to give it a bit of length by adding in things that perhaps are not directly relevant to a job as a junior associate, for example. So I think that's fine. And I note that Amanda has just written into the comments that CVs should be kept short. I couldn't agree more. I'd say for most junior associates, I'd even be going down to 1 page, unless you are coming from another firm or another position where you have experience that you should, of course, be highlighting. But for me, basically, there's 2 things I look at. What level are their skills at? And is there anything, I mean, it's a personal business. I mean, everyone has their own personal drafting style. If you're joining as a junior associate, you probably will be doing research and drafting for the first few years. So what I do is I will go through a CV and see if there's anything on that CV that leads me to someone in my network. And I know that people put references in their CV, but everyone out there looking for a job should know that it's a common practice for people to see, oh, look, that person worked at HSF for 2 months and did an internship there. I'm going to call up my friend Waraton at HSF and see how this person went. It happens all the time. This goes back to what I said before about, and also what Mandy said about honing your skills, getting to a good level, being good at what you do, because that will probably be something that gets you a job. And I know from our own experience, if we have a position open and there are 2 candidates and one of them we know is good from personal references and the other one we don't have a personal reference for, we will take the person who has been, someone's told us that they're going to be a good addition to our team.
Thank you very much, Mario. Mandy, I'm not going to ask you the questions about CV, but I'm going to ask you the question that you have been waiting for, which is, LinkedIn and platforms. Do you feel that, in addition to CVs, do you feel that social profiles such as LinkedIn would have an impact on applications, particularly, to law firms, institutions, or any of sort?
LinkedIn it's basically a live resume. When I get CVs, the first thing I do is I go and look at somebody's LinkedIn profile, partly because I appreciate that CVs often go through multiple rounds of editing and they may be proofread to within an inch of their lives. People are not quite so diligent about their LinkedIn profile, and I am very, very, very particular about writing skills. So I like to know if the person can write, and if they have not put their LinkedIn profile together well, if their posts are full of typographical errors and incoherent sentences, that gives me a really good insight into the person's writing skills. So I always look at LinkedIn. LinkedIn, it's a little bit like a shop window. You're basically saying, here I am, I'm a professional in this field, come on down, come and see what I've got. And you can update it all the time. Every time you get some relevant new experience, you can get rid of something that's less relevant and you can put that new, better experience in. You can constantly keep polishing the windows of your shop window. So LinkedIn is really, really important. It's also an opportunity to connect with people directly. You can write to people directly, people that you may not have the opportunity to meet in person. Of course, at the moment, we have very few opportunities to meet anyone in person. But even when times are normal, there are a great many people that you may not have the opportunity to meet. I, for example, may not have met many of you and many of the people listening today because I might not find myself in Cairo or Thailand or Nigeria or some of the many jurisdictions that we've mentioned today. So it's a really great opportunity to make those direct connections. Now, when I say make direct connections, there are things that you should not do at any cost. And the tolerance levels of different people for LinkedIn differ greatly. My tolerance level tends to be if you just randomly write to me and don't say why you want to connect with me and don't say where I came across you and don't make a little effort to at least write, you know, one line saying, I saw you speak, we met 3 years ago at this event, I'm probably going to look at that and go, well, do I have the energy? This person probably just wants to write to me and ask me for my help, but I don't know where they come from. I don't have any background information. So I tend to expect people to make a little bit of effort when it comes to reaching out. I don't think it's too much to ask to say you might put in one sentence. If we met in person, you wouldn't just stare blankly at me and hold out your business card. That's the equivalent. That's what you're doing. You're just going, here's my business card. You're not giving me any context. So I tend to like a little bit of context. I generally recommend that you don't just write to random people. Do not find the 10 most senior arbitration practitioners in your jurisdiction and bombard them with LinkedIn messages. This will anger them. Or even if they're really tolerant, it will probably still annoy them a little bit. So I really don't recommend doing that. I recommend a certain amount of restraint and diplomacy when it comes to using LinkedIn. Be strategic again. Think, are these the people I should be writing to? Would it be more appropriate for me to write to my peers or the junior associates or the sort of mid-level associates of that firm initially? Let's build my network organically. Let's not just go straight to the top of the tree and write to, I don't know, Lucy Reed, who is very nice, of course, but also very, very busy and may not be expecting to receive a lot of LinkedIn requests. So think really carefully about how you use LinkedIn, but do use it. It's a really, really, really valuable platform. And I could go on about LinkedIn all day, but I'm not going to, I promise. I'm going to stop.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Like we definitely agree with your point that LinkedIn is definitely a good addition to your CV. But you have mentioned this in our previous discussion that, you know, people can't differentiate between Facebook and LinkedIn, and, you know, what they should be posting on Facebook are what people are currently posting on LinkedIn, and Vanina is not on that. So Vanina, please allow me to pick on you on this point. Like, what are the tips and tricks on the things that should be on LinkedIn and things that shouldn't be at all costs on LinkedIn?
Well, LinkedIn is just professional news, achievements. If you've attended a conference, you've taken a photo, you can write about it just to keep your feed in there, update your network. And I think, well, I'll defer to Mandy about what should be posted on LinkedIn. But I just wanted to say, whenever I'm approached by a mentee, I always check their Facebook, because I know that employers always check their Facebook, and I will warn them about how many drunken photos I see of them, and to let them know that employers will see all of those drunken photos of them on the couch. So everybody should be careful about their privacy setting of their Facebook, that drunken photos, set them to private, or make your Facebook not searchable. Because this is one thing that have gotten people fired when they said they were calling in sick, but were actually partying, or before they're applying for jobs. People will check, they check your LinkedIn, but they also check your Facebook. So that's one thing to be mindful. And I think Mandy will have better tips as to what to post on LinkedIn, since she manages many pages.
Right. Well, thank you, Vanina. And okay, before we move on to the tips on LinkedIn, right? Now that you have mentioned, I get the sense that the job market is currently blurred between professional and personal profiles. Since you have mentioned, like, Mariel mentioned that, she's going to look at CV. Mandy mentioned that, okay, in addition to CV, she would also look at LinkedIn. And Vanina mentioned that in addition to all two of them, you would also look at their social networking profiles. Do you get this sense of trend? Maybe Kunraton can add on to this. Like, do you get the sense of trend that, like nowadays, in this recent era, people are paying more attention to social networking profiles, not only to the traditional CV that are just given to you, but seeing you as a well-rounded person. Do you sort of get this sense from the career market?
Yeah, I think so. Especially for Thailand, normally I would say if you want to hire anyone and your position is really limited, you want to do the due diligence. we call it DD. So sometimes that probably many people, especially before hiring anyone, will do the DD, both LinkedIn and also in Facebook sometimes. I think that's possible. And also for the Thai people, because we have many applications nowadays, and you cannot say that Facebook is just your personality. It's not that way nowadays. Many apps, and also probably in the future, Twitter or something for the next generation for Thailand, they would use like Twitter more than Facebook and LinkedIn. That would be another tool that you can like get to know people before you hiring. That's still possible. So I would recommend that all platform you would to be careful what you would like to create your personality, and any platform will affect for sure in your personality and your career path as well. That I would say.
Mario, you have unmuted yourself. I believe that you have something to add.
Very observant. This is just going on from everything that's just been said, and this I think covers all of it. Be aware of what comes up for you on Google as well, because I am not a LinkedIn au fait person. I don't use Facebook much either. But if I'm hiring someone, I will Google them, and then you get the Facebook, you get the LinkedIn, you get the drunken photo, or you get, in one case, you get a DUI, where I was like, okay, that's interesting. Double check that it's the same person. But that's, I mean, what's on Google is something you can sometimes to a lesser extent control than what's on your own Facebook and LinkedIn, but you should at least be aware of it, because if you're invited to an interview, you can be fairly certain that at least one of the people interviewing you has had a quick look through the first couple of pages of Google to see what comes up for you.
Thank you very much, Meryl.
I always get asked about my political protest in Thailand, and I have an open letter against me. And that comes up in my Google searches. So I'm asked about this all the time about my anti-government protest. So yes, definitely be mindful of your Google search.
Thank you very much. I believe that we have all built up for this moment. Mandy, the spotlight is almost yours. Like, you know, Vanina have mentioned that you would know the tips and tricks of what to be, like, how do you strategically, as like you have to like you like to mention, put on your LinkedIn profile? What sort of news do you have to share? If I'm applying for Mario's international arbitration team, would you strategically for the last 2 weeks be sharing news about international arbitration jurisdiction updates? You know, would this sort of thing depends on what sort of tricks do you have to give?
Well, the first thing that I recommend when it comes to trying to build your presence on LinkedIn is that you aim to be useful. You aim to be a source of useful information for the international arbitration community. Many at the beginning of their careers in the field will not have a large base of connections. They will not have lots of arbitration related achievements to put onto their profile. And so how do you, as a new graduate or as a new entrant to the field, demonstrate using LinkedIn that you're really interested in the field? Well, a good way of doing that is to start by maintaining an awareness of interesting developments in the field and beginning to share articles, beginning to share news alerts, beginning to share information more generally. I'm not sure that I would recommend in the 2 weeks before Mariel interviews me, plugging every single news alert that her firm has shared. I think she would probably notice that. I think she's smart enough to see that as a strategy. So I probably wouldn't do that. What I would aim to do is to demonstrate consistently that I have an interest in this field. I know what the hot topics are. I know what's going on because I'm keeping up to date. And so some of the things I started doing when I first began developing my LinkedIn profile were things like you share an interesting article and you tag the person and you say, you know, here's an interesting article from X. Hear what Vanina says this week about this particular issue, or this sort of thing. You know, you start sharing useful insights and useful information. And the person whose article you have shared will probably be quite pleased that you've bothered A, to read it, and B, to repost it. So it's a good way of beginning to build a relationship. And it also consistently demonstrates that you, despite your relative newcomer status, know what is happening. You are bothering to keep reading. You are bothering to keep educating yourself. And it's information that people in your network will find useful. We all do the proverbial vanity posts. We all do the proverbial, I'm delighted to appear at X conference. I'm delighted to have been appointed to X. I am delighted to do this. We're all delighted a lot on LinkedIn. One of the things that I was told about writing to your opposing counsel is you never express extremes of emotion. So you're never surprised, you're never delighted, you're always neutral. Nothing is unpredictable, everything is within your powers. But on LinkedIn, we all do it. We all say, I'm delighted, I do it. And that's great because you want to show that you're doing things, you want to show that you're involved. But when it comes to actually building a following, the thing that I have found most useful is giving something back. Is sharing know-how, sharing initiatives, and congratulating people. So a great way of reminding your connections that you still know who they are and you still know they're there is to, you know, post something like, you know, the new committee for the YTHAC and say, congratulations to my friends XYZ on their appointments. Isn't this, you know, this is fantastic. So those are some of the very basic tips that I can offer. I talk to people about LinkedIn all the time. I'm a total geek. I spend far too much time looking at data analytics and what sort of posts work. People like posts about cake, by the way. People like posts about cake. They like posts that include smiling people. So if you have a photograph of smiling people, that seems to go down pretty well. There are all sorts of psychological tips. It used to be, for example, that your profile photograph should look at your name. It was a kind of like, here's my name, this is me. So there's all sorts of really fun psychological tips for what people engage with on LinkedIn. But my most basic primary tip is share things that are useful. Just give something back, spread some knowledge. That's my most basic tip. I hope that's useful.
Thank you very much, Mandy. I have been getting notifications personally from many attendees asking when would be the Q&A session, since they are very excited. And you know, my next set of questions will be about multi-jurisdiction recommendation anyways. And these questions have been asked like a moment ago also is about a recommendation on how to get and, you know, cross-jurisdictional jobs. Perhaps if I may address this to Vanina or Mario, who have worked across multi-jurisdiction. So I'll quickly read the questions so that the participants can follow. The question goes, I'm a Zimbabwean registered lawyer and I have practiced litigation for 5 years in Zimbabwe. I'm currently studying a master's degree. What are the prospects that I may join a law firm that does arbitration outside Zimbabwe? Perhaps Vanina, you can respond to that. Curious? You have muted yourself, Vanina. So.
unfortunately, the questionnaire didn't say where, but where the questionnaire would like to join. But the arbitration world is very fluid. If you look at practitioners in Paris, in London, or in Hong Kong, for example, they are from all over the world. And I think you would have to look at where your skills are needed. So I think that the questionnaire is doing a master's in investment law. Is that correct?
Correct, that's correct.
Yeah, so I mean, for example, that kind of practice is done a lot in Paris. So that is where a lot of law firms in France represent African states or deal with disputes involving Africa. So that is a place that I would, for example, recommend looking. You want to look at the jurisdiction where your skills are, where your brand is going to sell. I always talk about your brand. What is your unique selling point? What is your specialty? So if you have a regional knowledge or a special language, then you have to look at which jurisdiction does the kind of work. There's a lot of boutique firms in Paris that does investor-state disputes, either representing African states or investors that are suing African states. So I think the prospects are there, provided that you know the right experience. So what you have to do is start networking with other lawyers from the same region. Recently, it was Africa Arbitration Day in early September, where there were speakers coming from everywhere. Tunde was one of them, the Nigerian counsel from the ICC. So getting involved, getting through the list. I will give a little blurb. Mandy and I are Director of Arbitral Women. You can sign up for our news alert, our events list. You don't have to be a woman to sign up for our newsletter and events list so that you can have a sense of events going on around the world. And that's one thing, that you can network with speakers. And then I'll leave it to Mario.
Ariel, please, do you have something to add?
I don't actually think my advice is very different. I think, as Vanina says, you need to work out what skills you bring to the table and work out where realistically you're going to have the best chances, and then focus there and on that jurisdiction as the first step. And as Vanina said, for Africa-related work, most offices do that out of their Paris or London offices. To a lesser extent, for example, in my firm, we do it also out of Lisbon. But I'm guessing your best chances would be to reach out to your network in those jurisdictions and get your name out there. I mean, this will probably be a process in itself, but I always say you have to start somewhere. So I'm assuming you've got your international network sorted out because you're listening to webinars like this. So I would reach out in those jurisdictions and then take it from there.
Thank you very much, Mariel. I have another similar yet totally different set question that's addressed to all panelists. This is a slight reverse, because this person has 17 years of litigation experience and corporate law at the local jurisdiction, but is currently pursuing LLM in public international law. And the person wanted to ask, is there any way to join an international law firm? And if there is any room for a seasoned lawyers to start from scratch? I think this is really interesting questions. Perhaps I can ask Kun Varathon to respond to this question. It's like, if you're looking at this person's profile, 17 years, local jurisdiction experience, pursuing LLM in public international law, is there any room for these particular types of profile to start from scratch in international arbitration, or is it right to say that this person is starting from scratch?
I think it's possible. My career is from background on litigation, and at that time, just a few players in the market in Thailand. So what I think and discussed with my boss at that time, Kun Wong, advised that because in Thailand you have only a few litigators, a lot of litigators, but just only a few good litigators with English capability. So I would say you have like a lot of experience in 20 years or more than 20 years in litigation. And if you can put that experience into international arbitration with some language ability or some nowadays, not just only maybe the next topic, but not only your knowledge about the procedural law or the governing law, but now most of law firms focus on business sector. I mean, if you like work 20 years with some specific business sector from, for example, telecom. I did a lot of like telecom arbitration, local telecom dispute in arbitration at THAC, Thai Arbitration Center at that time, 10 years ago, and develop specialists on this area. So it benefit me when I go up. So if you have like 20 years with some specific experience, plus some language ability, then you can like get involved in international arbitration for sure.
Thank you very much, Kun Raton. We have another question, which would also, touch upon like related issues that we have already discussed about internship for young people. This is from an anonymous attendees. It reads, most of the internship programs are for younger people. Please, what would be your advice to persons who can't gain access to such platform due to age limitation? Perhaps Amanda, perhaps you can respond to this queries. I
haven't come across that many internships where there's an age limitation, personally. I've come across, obviously you're probably going to effectively have graduated out of the student internship options, but that's the inevitable result of ceasing to be a student. When it comes to professional internships, I know people who've been partners at law firms in their home jurisdiction, and they've done an internship at one of the leading arbitration firms, for example. People seem to pursue internships in international arbitration at many different stages of their career. Sometimes simply because they want to get some international experience, and it may be that their firm focuses on domestic arbitration. The sort of the caveats I have seen when it comes to getting those opportunities are things like, do you have a master's degree or not? I've heard about internships where generally they won't consider you unless you have a master's degree. So that does seem to occasionally be a sort of preliminary cutoff criteria. But I expect there are internships out there that are limited by age in some way, or it may be that you need to be, or they generally recommend you're less than 5 years PQE or something like that. But I don't think that seniority is necessarily a hurdle to becoming an intern. It may be a hurdle in the sense that the work you will be doing as an intern will be, I mean, if you have 20 years of experience and you're doing an internship, I imagine that's probably going to be a little bit frustrating. Everybody needs to start at the bottom, but if you're, being asked to do something extremely basic and you've spent 20 years in practice, you may want to think about whether this is the best use of your skills. This is the best way to develop your career. Possibly you might want to look at a sort of visiting foreign counsel role or something like that, rather than looking at an internship role. So you might want to think about where to peg yourself in the structure and whether you think that an internship is the way forward. It may be that you should possibly try and get into arbitration in a different way, possibly start publishing, something like that, make connections, connect with a more senior practitioner from another part of the world and offer to co-author something, or find a way to begin to make your mark other than going back to the basics, basically. But everybody's case is different. So I didn't do an internship. I obviously hear a lot about them due to careers in arbitration because people constantly tell me about them, but I didn't do one. I don't think it's necessary to do one to develop a career. And I've expressed some quite strong views about internships in the past because I speak a lot about socioeconomic diversity. So unpaid internships and me are not really very good friends, I must confess.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Vanina, I believe you have something to add as well.
Yes, and actually on the last question as well about the litigation and corporate experience for 17 years. One route of transitioning is through accreditation with the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, which is one great way of, say, becoming a fellow. There is a route through practical experience and then waiving in, and then taking an award writing exam, and then getting an assessment. And then you have the accreditation of being a fellow. And at least that gives you some kind of formal level of certification. And then joining arbitral groups, such as in various jurisdictions. I don't know where the questionnaire comes from, but for example, in Hong Kong, there's the ICC Arbitration Committee, where individuals can pay to become a member of the committee. So start putting yourself into those networks so that you can kind of transition your brand and become known in that field, even if you're not getting the work yet. And with respect to the other question about age limitations for internships, the route that people often neglect is the tribunal secretary route. And the most famous person who started their career as a tribunal secretary is Qian Bao, who then became the head of the HKIAC. And she first started off as Neil Kaplan's tribunal secretary. And this is one of the greatest ways to learn about international arbitration, is to work directly with a senior arbitrator. And one way of doing that is to just start contacting arbitrators and getting to know them. And I think that's a very viable option. And there's certainly no age limit to being a tribunal secretary.
Thank you very much, Vanina. You have rightfully mentioned that, my next question would also be relating to accreditation. Now that it has been brought up, Mandy, perhaps you can share with us as well, like what sort of accreditation are out there? Since I believe that you have probably spent a fair share of amount on LinkedIn, as you have mentioned, and also is it important to get an accreditation?
I have one, so I have to disclose that. If I said I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and I chaired their young members group for 2 years and I said, no, I think accreditation is not important, I think some people might say I was a hypocrite. So is it important to be able to demonstrate to the international community that you know what you're talking about when it comes to arbitration? Absolutely. Is it important to bankrupt yourself in order to pursue these courses? No, it is not. You need to think sensibly about the pursuit of accreditation. I was lucky, my firm paid for me to undertake the accelerated route to membership through the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, so I was privileged in that regard. I then went on and did the associated fellowship qualification in due course. I appreciate that, particularly in emerging jurisdictions, accreditation can be extremely expensive. The Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, as we've said in the comments, is presently offering a discounted Introduction to ADR course, which allows students in particular to begin their pathway to accreditation if they wish to do so. It's important to remember that becoming a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators demonstrates that you have a certain amount of knowledge, and it will help you to apply to certain arbitral panels in the future. Whether you're a fellow of the Chartered Institute or a fellow of another arbitration institute from across the globe, it doesn't mean you are magically super proficient as being an arbitrator. A lot of the fellows I know have never sat as an arbitrator, have no intention of doing so for another decade at the least. And I think it's really important to remember that when you become, for example, an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, you're trying to run before you walk. If you run around saying, I am now an accredited arbitrator, you've demonstrated that you have a certain amount of knowledge in relation to the field. It doesn't mean that you are automatically, magically equipped with all the skills that you need to become an arbitrator. That comes with practical experience. That comes with actually being in the trenches and handling cases and knowing about the context in which disputes arise. Arbitration is a method of dispute resolution, and yes, it has its own language and it has its own rules and it has its own jurisprudence and so on and so forth. But if you don't understand corporate law, if you don't understand human rights law, if you don't understand investment law, if you don't understand international law, you're going to find yourself at a disadvantage. So yes, accreditation has a value, but my advice would be to think about at what stage of your career you actually decide to pursue it. I didn't become a member of the Chartered Institute until I was about 4 or 5 years into my career. So I was able to access the accelerated route because of my practical experience, but I didn't just, you know, become a graduate and go, right, I'm now going to become a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. You need to think about when it makes sense to spend that money, particularly if you're in an emerging jurisdiction where the annual salary or the monthly salary for newly qualified lawyers may not be a sum that is commensurate with devoting several £1,000s to becoming a member at the beginning of your career. So think about the value. There is a value, but think about when you decide to tap into that value would be my advice.
Thank you very much, Mandy. That's very insightful. Vanina, I believe you have something to add as well.
Yes, just to add on the Charter of Institute of Arbitrators right now, I mean, students can join, and with COVID, there are discounts for courses for students, but what they're rolling out right now for next year is virtual internships for students, where basically it's like you're shadowing an arbitrator or a counsel practitioners, and they're also going to roll out a mentorship program for student members. So that's one thing to be on the lookout for. And we're currently in discussion with YTHAC about scheduling an online introduction to international arbitration course sometime next year. So if you sign up for YTHAC, you will receive the news for the student rate and for the associate rate, which I think the rate is less than £100. So just keep that in mind. And don't forget to sign up. I put the link in the comment.
Thank you very much, Vanina. I believe there's another question that just came in as well. It's a very interesting question, and I'm going to ask Kun Raton about this. The question goes, what is the best thing about arbitration compared to other fields of practice?
I think in each practice have some interesting point. For the international arbitration would be we call a multicultural. You can meet many people in many areas, especially from other jurisdiction, many smart people from many jurisdiction. And also in international arbitration and also some litigation, you will have to face with new story all the time, new story and new issue all the time, not like the transactional lawyer. You maybe your scope of area will be the same, but in litigation or in international arbitration, you will face with the challenging issue, interesting issue, and never be the same in each case. So you can face with a new topic all the time. That would be my interesting point that I would interested in international arbitration and also including litigation.
Thank you, Kun Raton. Multicultural, it's something that, one of the good things of international arbitration. Mario, perhaps you can help Kun Raton add up to this point as well. I believe that you're currently based in Hong Kong, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're originally from in Australia. So you must be probably facing this multicultural aspects of arbitration.
Indeed. Well, I'm currently based in Hong Kong, but I actually spent 15 years in Germany before moving to Hong Kong in 2016. So I think I can speak to that topic quite well. And I do think arbitration, I mean, there are some others, obviously, like international banking, which was also very prominent in my time in Frankfurt. But this is one of the rare areas where you really can have an international practice. And it does matter where you're qualified, and I'm not sure if I'll have time to get to that, but to a much lesser extent than perhaps if you're trying to do marital law or inheritance law or something, which are obviously very dependent on the jurisdiction. As many of you may also be aware, many jurisdictions also contain exceptions in their respective arbitral laws about who can practice arbitration-related matters. And I know in Hong Kong, for example, there's an explicit expansion, if you like, for international practitioners who are not Hong Kong qualified who can still do arbitration work in Hong Kong. So I do think that the international aspects of it are one of the most rewarding aspects of it. And also the fact, as Kun Waraton mentioned, you become a temporary expert, as I like to call it, for the time your case is going, depending on what it's on, if it's infrastructure or post-M&A whatever, you live and breathe that subject matter. You're working with experts who are teaching you a lot of things you never thought you would need to know. And that's something that's very, very rewarding. And of course, when you start a new case, you start from scratch in many ways, but they're hiring you for the procedural expertise. And of course, the lex arbitrii and things related to that. But I think it's a very, for people like me who get bored quickly, I think it's a very nice career to have because you're always being confronted with new fact scenarios and new issues that you have to solve.
Thank you very much, Mariel. We also have another question coming from a student, a final year law student at that, asking about COVID-19 scenarios and how it's currently affecting the economy and the employment sector, particularly for law firms, or if not, then like, you know, globally throughout the industry. Is there any advice to law graduates looking for a job amid the pandemic? Perhaps this can go to Vanina or Mandy, because I believe that you guys have been mentoring a lot of students of your own or mentees of your own. Is there any particular advice that you want to give, you know, to students who are looking for jobs amidst the pandemic? Either one of you.
I think I addressed the example of my researcher who is in India and who initially had an internship with a law firm in Germany, but because of the lockdown, his internship was canceled. And so he reached out to me, and I had various discussions with him, and I've reviewed his work. So I've taken him on as a researcher for a few months now while he tries to find a job. And I've also been mentoring him and reviewing his CV, but he is a hired researcher. So that is one route of doing if you're in a pandemic and you cannot travel at the moment, depending on where your jurisdiction is. But I would see if Mandy has other ideas.
This is my favorite question. I've spoken at a number of careers events during lockdown, and this is my favorite question because I get to quote Doctor Who. And I'm a big fan of Doctor Who, which is a British science fiction television program. For anyone who has not heard of Doctor Who, you should Google that, check it out. At the moment, those who are trying to find jobs in this field, and indeed any legal field, are likely to be absolutely terrified. The last time the economy was in the toilet to quite this extent was around the time we had the credit crunch. And that was not a fun time to be looking for illegal roles, as I remember. So you know what? I appreciate that at the moment you're probably absolutely terrified. But you know what? Fear is a superpower. This is the Doctor Who quote. Fear is a superpower. Because you're scared, because you don't know what the future holds, you're going to work harder now than you have ever worked in your entire life. You are going to take advantage of every single opportunity that comes up. You're going to say yes to everything. You're going to participate in so many webinars. You're going to watch 100 lectures delivered by Gary Bourne on Walters Kluwer. You're going to participate in free courses. You're going to sign up for young members groups. You're going to try and speak at events and organize events. You're going to start publishing. You're going to reach out to your peers and to more senior practitioners. You are going to do absolutely everything that you possibly can to push yourself forward. You're going to use this period to make your resume the best possible resume it could be, so that when the market begins to pick up again, and in some areas there's some small signs that there's a little bit of movement, but there's not that much going on at the moment, in my view, and people send me vacancies because I populate careers in arbitration with them. But you're going to take all of that fear and you're going to pour it into making yourself the best possible candidate for 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now, when the market starts to pick up again. The people who will get the jobs are the people who have used this period well. So fear is a superpower. Fear is your superpower. Use it, and you will get those opportunities in the future. I like saying that. Thank you very much. It's my favorite thing to say during these conversations.
Thank you very much, Mandy. I believe we're coming to the time that we have fixed, like the for our panel discussion. Is there anything in particular, this goes to the panelists, that you wanted to share, or any sort of message that you wanted to say that you feel that haven't been touched upon in this panel discussion but came up previously in our other discussion? Please feel free to share, because we do have a few minutes left. And for participants, please, we have a few minutes left, so please feel free to ask questions that haven't, if they haven't been already addressed. Vanina?
Yes, one thing I want to say is really be confident in yourself. I know that when you're starting out, it can feel intimidating. It's a very, very competitive field, and you know that, when you were in school, you might have been the best of the best, but now all of a sudden you're competing with the best of the best within the entire world. So it may be easy to feel discouraged and to feel like you have sent in hundreds of resumes. And I always tell everybody that when I was applying for my first job, I got rejected 27 times before I got the job. So always know that. Keep going. Don't let anything deter you. Be fiercely determined, and then you will get the success that you deserve.
Thank you very much, Vanina. That's truly inspiring. Mariel?
Just to add on to what's already been said, I think this goes back to Mandy's point about using the time now wisely. There are many things you can do out there, and I realize that at the moment it may all look a bit bleak, but just reach out to people. I mean, we recently, we got approached to do an article for an Indian law review publication, and we debated whether or not we had time to do it. And then the editorial board got back to us and said they were going to give us a researcher to help us. And I mean, this is the kind of thing that really showed initiative, and we were very pleasantly surprised to see that this was happening. So we've got the opportunity to get to know this person. He's helping us do a first draft of the article. And I think that's a very, very good idea for people at the moment who may be sailing along for a bit, wondering what's going to happen and how the world's going to be next year. But even if you're not involved in an institution like a university, reach out to your network, use LinkedIn the way Amanda's been mentioning it. The worst thing people can do is say no, but who knows, they might have a need for someone to assist them. They may have a particularly busy time where they're in need of an extra pair of hands, or learn a language, do something like that. I mean, I had a person in Hong Kong reach out to me and said they're looking for a job, but they're using that time to improve their Mandarin skills. And these are the kind of things, to Mandy's point, that are really going to stick out next year when the market picks up, hopefully, and you'll give yourself a competitive advantage over others.
Thank you very much, Mariel. I believe we have a lot of questions left, but unfortunately, we just have not enough time to address all of them. I believe that each of the panelists are more than happy to, have specific questions addressed to them personally, to the effect that are moderate and, respected, as Mandy have pointed out. And so, without any further ado, I just wanted to thank you all the participants for attending this first inaugural event of YTHAC. And we just hope to come up with more useful and more topical topics of our next discussion. And I just wish that everyone stay tuned to YTHAC initiatives, and don't forget to sign up for our, to be a membership, to subscribe to our mailing list. And so if there's anything else that the panelists wanted to add, I'd like to just mark the end of this very fruitful panel discussion. And thank you all the panelists and all the parties involved for making this panel discussion possible. So just feel free. I think the stage is yours, and just wanted to say thank you.
Thanks, Prin. And to everyone listening, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure my email address is available on Google, and I'm more than happy to answer questions privately. So thank you for listening. I hope it was useful.
Thanks, Mariel.
Thank you, Prin. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Thank you for your interesting questions and for engaging with us all today. It's been fun. You can find me on LinkedIn as Careers in Arbitration. You can also find me on LinkedIn as me, but please do tell me how you came to find me. Otherwise, I'll be confused. I'm old, you see. I need guidance. I need to know. I can't remember where people met me.
Thank you, Yuan.
Well, thank you everybody for participating today. We are so impressed to see people from everywhere around the world. I think it touches all of our hearts, and especially it's such an encouragement for this being the inaugural event of the YTHAC. And I think you're just giving us the encouragement needed for us to do more of these kinds of panels, knowing that it's useful and that it's helping out the community. So please do sign up to be a member so that you'll hear more about these types of events, because we're not looking to just be a global, a local community. We're looking to be an international community where we can all connect. And most importantly, please come back, and you can find me on LinkedIn, but also please message me that you're from this webinar, because I get a lot of random requests. And thank you so much. See you again. And thank you, Prin, for moderating. He is our youngest member of the committee, and he got this through his good networking skills.
Thank you,
And
Vanita.
his brilliance, and his brilliance, but it was from his good networking skills.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. So, all right. I'll see you all around.
Thanks, Prin.
Cheers.